Welcome, welcome, welcome to our video today, which will be on Biology Chapter 5, Endocrinology. All right, let's get right into it. So, a lot of this chapter is memorization, okay? About what hormones are produced where and what they act on and what they do. Okay, so that's basically the overview of this chapter right here. So we have some endocrine organs, okay, and that is kind of the overview here. Each of these little boxes you see, all right? So we have the hypothalamus, all right? Your hypothalamus, which produces these hormones right here. So it will secrete GnRH, okay, which will cause an increase in FSH and LH. Okay, so we'll talk about what those things do further down here, okay? But yes, GnRH causes an increase in FSH and LH. We have GHRH, growth hormone releasing hormone, causes an increase in growth hormone being released. We have TRH, got wiped off a little bit here. So you have TRH, which increases the thyroid stimulating hormone that is produced. Okay, TRH causes an increase in TSH, which again we'll talk about down here. Then we have CRH, which causes an increase in ACTH. We have dopamine, which causes a decrease in prolactin. Okay, decrease in prolactin, this is an important thing to know. And then we also have ADH and oxytocin. So the ADH will decrease the water in your urine, and oxytocin will increase contractions during labor. However, these two hormones are produced in the hypothalamus, but they are released by the posterior pituitary. Okay? The posterior pituitary. Now, on to our anterior pituitary. Okay? So FSH, which is increase when GnRH is released. So FSH prompts spermatogenesis in males and development of the ovarian follicles in females. Okay. Then we have LH, which induces ovulation in females and promotes testosterone production in males. And these two hormones we'll look at a little bit later when we look at the reproduction chapter. But yes, for now we're just recognizing these two things as hormones that are released by the anterior pituitary that are affected by the release of GnRH. Okay, so next we have ACTH, which releases glucocorticoids, and again is affected by the hypothalamus. The release of the CRH in the hypothalamus, to be specific. And then we have TSH, okay, which is stimulated by TRH, okay, and it is promotes the release of thyroxine in the thyroid. So you will see that again in our thyroid hormone, or sorry, our thyroid gland section, what those two hormones are. Then we have prolactin, which will increase the production of milk. We have endorphins, which decrease pain, and we have GH, growth hormone. Okay, so these first ones that I listed, FSH, LH, ACTH, and TSH, for one, those are all stimulated by hormones that come from the hypothalamus, right? But they are released by this anterior pituitary, and these are tropic because that means these are tropic hormones, which means they will act on other endocrine organs, okay? And this uses the acronym FLAT PEG, okay? Because these last three, the PEG part of it, are non-tropic, okay? So they do not act on endocrine organs. All right, so that's our anterior pituitary. Now we have our pineal gland, which secretes melatonin, which is involved with your circadian rhythm. Then we have our adrenal medulla, which will produce epinephrine and norepinephrine, okay, two important hormones in our fight or flight responses. And these are also catecholamines, okay, and these both increase your heart rate and increase your blood pressure. Then we have our adrenal cortex, and this is where our glucocorticoids, our mineral corticoids, and our androgens are secreted. So we have glucocorticoids, for example, cortisol, which will increase glucose and decrease protein synthesis. Then we have mineral corticoids, like, for example, aldosterone, which we will see in a later chapter as well when we're discussing the kidney. But the mineral corticoids and aldosterone will decrease the potassium in the blood, increase sodium in the blood, and increase the water and blood, increase H2O as well in the blood, as well as increase blood pressure, okay? So aldosterone, as we said, acts on the distal tubule in your kidney. It increases H2O and increases Na plus resorption, which is triggered by low blood volume. So when you have low blood volume, aldosterone will be released and it will act on the distal tubule to increase the H2O and the sodium in your blood. But again, more specific, we will get into that with the kidney. But then we have androgens, which will be secreted by the adrenal cortex, but they are converted to testosterone and estrogen in the gonads, okay? So those are the three kind of main important things from the adrenal cortex. Then we have our thyroid gland down here, which is responsible for T4 and T3, which are those thyroid hormones that increase basal metabolism. And it's also responsible for the production of calcitonin, which is made by parafollicular cells. And this increases the calcium in the bone and decreases the calcium in the blood. Okay, so calcitonin tones down the calcium in the blood is how I remembered it, okay? Tones down the calcium just floating around in your body and will increase the calcium in your bone, okay? And again, we will have more details on bones in a later chapter. So now we have our parathyroid gland, okay? And this actually will decrease the calcium in the bone. It increases calcium in the blood. So the parathyroid gland that secretes the parathyroid hormone actually has the opposite effect of calcitonin. Okay, so this is how that calcium is regulated, using calcitonin and parathyroid hormone. So, so the parathyroid hormone, basically, when the bone breaks down, it will release calcium, which then will activate calcitriol, and the calcitriol is required for the calcium the calcium absorption. Okay, so when calcium is absorbed, it will be, taken from your bone that it had just broken down, and the calcium in your blood will increase. Okay, so that's the parathyroid hormone with the parathyroid gland. We have our pancreas, which is super, super important when we talk about metabolism as well, because, the metabolism chapters that deal with glycolysis and all of those metabolic pathways, because we are talking about insulin and glucagon. So insulin decreases the glucose in your blood. So if you just ate something, you have a lot of glucose, right, in your blood, and your body and your pancreas will release insulin, which will allow that glucose to be absorbed by the cells so that they can get their glucose, okay? So insulin will decrease the blood glucose, okay? Then we have glucagon, which will increase the glucose in your blood. So let's say you haven't eaten for a long time, and you need some of that glucose getting transported through your body. Glucagon will be released, and you will increase the amount of glucose in your blood. Then we have somatostatin, which will decrease the insulin and decrease the glucagon. All right, so this is kind of important. And while we're on this topic, let's just quickly talk about our feeding behavior for example. So we said glucagon, right, plays a role, and so does insulin with feeding. So glucagon and ghrelin are caused by an increase in hunger, okay? Then we have ADH and aldosterone, which are caused by an increase in thirst. Okay, so when you're thirsty, that means you will have more ADH and aldosterone production. Then leptin will also participate in this feeding behavior, and leptin actually increases your fullness, if that makes sense. So leptin helps you know that you're full, so you stop eating. So leptin, glucagon, ghrelin, those are all things that help with your feeding behavior, okay? So those are also important to know. Next, we have the gonads, which produce testosterone in the testes and estrogen or progesterone in ovaries, okay? And our final part of this chapter is kind of the introductory piece. And that's when we talk about peptide hormones and steroid hormones. So we have peptide hormones, okay, that are made of amino acids. They are polar, and they use extracellular receptors, and it's the Golgi that modifies and activates them. Then we have the steroid hormone, okay, and those are made in the gonads and adrenal cortex only. That's very important. They are carried by a protein, and they do not dissolve, which means they are non-polar, and they have receptors in membranes, okay? So that is the conclusion of this video and this overview of the endocrinology chapter for the MCAT. Yes, hopefully that was helpful. And if you have any questions, please put them below. Again, there's a lot of memorization in this video, but if you know all of these hormones and where they come from and what they do, that will definitely help you when you're dealing with passages, okay? So I will see you in our next video.